Hi, I'm Michael Johnson. This is Forge TV, and you are watching the SU President Debate. Here with me today is Lucas, Alison, Rosie, Evie, Dominic, Ash, and Grace, your potential candidates. So, firstly, I'm going to start with a question to you all. Can you give one thing about the SU that you most want to improve in your year in office? I'm going to start with Lucas with this one.
So mine is, well, this year has been a terrible year for the social life of all students. And I think for me, when I came to university, I came to Sheffield because of the Students' Union and the whole student experience. So getting involved with societies and sports clubs. And I've had a terrific time throughout the years. And the thing I wanted to do specifically is to be able to enrich the student experience. So making sure that societies have the space that they need to put on the terrific events, because as some of you will be aware, space is at a premium when things are back in person. And secondly, the sports facilities that we've got at Goodwin, at Norton, they're not fit for purpose. There needs to be a concerted effort to improve the facilities on offer so that our athletes can also compete on a national level.
Nice. Rosie, could you go next?
Yes, sorry. I think the most things I want to do really this year is bring the events back to the Students' Union, but I really want to make sure that the events that we make this year really integrate values of inclusivity and diversity, but also sustainability, with massive push for mental health issues. So I know mental health services have been, as probably everyone knows, they're seriously underfunded. They're not getting any more funding than they ever have been. So I think I really want to integrate mental health, preemptive mental health policy into the social life of students. I think that's just the next step that we all should be taking. And it means that we won't be relying as much on these services as we have been. So, yeah.
Nice. Evie, would you go next?
So looking specifically at the SU, I want to make sure that all events and campaigns are accessible and inclusive. So how I want to do this is I want to improve, make the kind of events that we're running sorry, I'm losing my words a bit. I want to kind of increase the breadth that we're doing. So this is like a lot more alcohol-free events, so that we're supporting the kind of students that aren't that comfortable being around alcohol, because we've already got a thriving club nights at the SU, and more international holidays as well. And additionally, I want to create and develop some requirements that organisers of events and campaigns at the SU have to follow, so that's students, staff, external speakers, and it's going to be developed by representative committees and underrepresented groups based off their lived experience. Like, I know I've had some really horrible experiences recently from bouncers just at Morrison's, and it makes me feel uncomfortable going there now. And I never want anyone to feel like that at the SU. Yes, that's what
Nice. Alison, can you go next?
Yeah, so obviously our SU does an amazing job with incredible societies, but I also think it could be a more radical space. I think this year we've seen how the treatment of students has been so poor, and I would love to see like a student mentors union be set up as part of the SU, and maybe in collaboration with sort of external community groups like Acorn, to enable like just to stand up for students more. And actually, because often we're put into this position where we have new responsibilities, and yeah, so just be a more radical space basically.
Nice. Dominic, can you go next?
Yeah, I think Alison is actually completely right when she talks about the need to create a more radical space. I think the crux of all of our issues ultimately is that the Students' Union has partially lost its identity. We've moved away from being a political union that is militant and adversarial with regards to our relationship with the university. And we've pivoted towards being more corporate in our outlook and more focused on bars and cafes, which are great and which are things that obviously I enjoy partaking in as well. But if we really want to address these big issues that students are facing, we need to drastically change our relationship with the university. And that involves the politicisation of campus to get as many students as possible involved in the radical work that our union can achieve with regards to housing, mental health reform, and so forth.
Nice. Grace, can you go next?
Sure. I think emotional support is one of the biggest things that we need to see change in the SU over the next year. I think students are not being supported by their student union. The mental health service is absolutely abysmal, and included within that, the university and the student union are not fairly representing people of colour and Black people. I think we can all agree this year has been incredibly hard for everyone with COVID, but it's been exceptionally hard for our Black students. And I really think it's time that someone with actually lived experience of coming from those demographics is in a position of power, because it's not just about listening to the voices and trying to amplify them. It's about actually putting that representation at the top of our pyramid in leadership positions. And at the moment, anti-racism is not embedded within our institution.
Nice. Ash, would you like to go?
Yeah, so for me, the first priority over the summer, before the bulk of the new students arrive in September, is going to be addressing our relationship with the university. As Dom said, I think we need to be more political as a students' union, and I think the university has benefited quite dramatically this year by what is effectively a weakened students' union, because while we've had a dedicated officers team in place, what we haven't had is students in the union, which makes it far harder for us to organise, far harder for us to engage, and far harder for us to protest. I don't think you have to look hard to see that. It's symptomatic of this year. The university has refused real, concrete, effective offsets for the impact of COVID on the quality of education. The university has exploited students who have housing contracts with them this year, refusing to let students out of those contracts. I think, we can talk about exploitative landlords all day, I'm sure, but the most exploitative landlord in Sheffield, as far as students are concerned, is the University of Sheffield itself. I think we need to tackle that. We need to address that, and that will be my number one priority over the summer. After that, we need to focus on getting this students' union ready to be open again. Our societies are missing effectively a year of intake. They're going to be struggling a lot to engage people, to get the amount of people that they're used to having engaged and turning up. So we need to be absolutely certain that we're offering all the support that they need. And finally, I'd like to spend the year changing our power structures. As Dom said, we're a very corporate power structure at the moment with one person at the top. I don't think we need that. I think we elect a team of leaders every year, and I think we should allow those people to be leaders. I don't think we need a president. I think what we'd be far better off doing is adopting a totally flat power structure, which would empower the officers to speak to their areas of expertise, speak to the areas that affect them the most, and also create space where the student officer team isn't representative of a particular issue, to actually talk to students who are and put them in the room to talk about the issues. I don't want to talk to students, hear what their issues are, write them down and repeat them somewhere else. I want to take them into the rooms where their voices need to be heard, put them there and let them talk. And I will leave the room or I will sit there quietly. I will not speak for them. I will put them on the important seats they need to be on, because I don't believe in having this strange pyramid structure, as Grace pointed out, where everything is centered on one person, because there is no one person who can be truly representative of our entire student body.
Okay. So I'm going to ask another group question. Many of you mentioned demanding refunds or compensation for students from both university fees and rent. There's been many attempts to get such concessions for a long time now. So what makes any of you think you can be successful in this pledge during your year in office? I'm going to start with Alison. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I think it's an incredible time in student leadership. I think the momentum that's happening with student grassroots movements such as Pause or Pay, Liberate the Uni, United Against Fees is something that we need to use and actually stand on the shoulders of what people have come before us. I think the Forgotten Students campaign is really good, and we need to continue that, because I think for many times, like as before, students are realizing that they're just not treated properly, and that does need to change, and a government bailout is needed. Yes, the government doesn't seem to think is a very anti-uni government, but I think the narrative of like, oh well, it's not going to change, so we just keep going, is not good enough. That's not what student leadership is about, and I think to work in solidarity with a collective university from different universities across the nation is what's going to make it happen. It's collective work.
Evie, same question.
Yeah, I really agree with Alison. I think it's going to come down to uniting with a lot of SUs around the country. I've done some work this year with Jordan on a campaign called Invest for Change, and it's involved a lot of different SUs around the country. So I've already got a fair amount of experience in like broadening the horizons with this kind of thing, and it's going to take a big amount of work, but there's such a push for it, such a like backing behind it, that I think that we've really got a chance this year. And there's a lot of means behind this.
Nice. Dominic, next.
So yeah, on a very basic level, it comes back to what I was saying about politicising the union and changing how we operate. I think we've got to a point now where we have to recognise the fact that we can't get everything we want just by asking nicely. I think the period of just asking and hoping the university is kind enough to treat us with the respect and dignity we deserve is over. And so it's about applying pressure on the university, and I think a good way of doing this is hitting them where it hurts, which is student recruitment, because this is, since the marketisation of higher education, this is their funding source. So we can do that in several ways. One way is to take back ownership of the union's intellectual property and deny them the use of our branding materials in student recruitment. So for example, you go on their website, it says, we have the best student union in the country. Well, we won't have the best student union in the country if the university doesn't fund us properly. And we need to be far more willing to take back control of our image, of our brand, and deny that use of the university if they're not actually operating in our interests. Furthermore, we can also shut the Students' Union building on open days and deny services. We can hold sit-in protests and so forth to really start to put pressure on the university and harm their potential student recruitment, to force them into actually talking and making some genuine concessions for change. So it's about completely shifting the narrative of what the relationship between the union and the university should be. This should be a union, and a militant union at that.
Nice. Ash, will you go next?
Sure. I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic here and say that, I definitely agree that we should be united with student unions and demanding a government bailout to enable universities to offer tuition fee refunds, rent refunds where students have had accommodation and been compelled to keep it this year. I don't think that with our current government that's very likely to happen. That's not to say it's not a worthy thing to fight for, and I would definitely fight for it. But I think one thing we should keep in mind is that, assuming it doesn't happen, we can't allow the university to use that as an excuse to rip students off. While this university might not have the financial resources to off sweeping tuition fee refunds or rent refunds without a government bailout, that doesn't mean they're off the hook. And I think we can demand things that they can't realistically deny. I think we can demand any student who has been forced to rent property this year when they haven't needed it should be offered a drastic cut to their rent in future, if not free rent for the following year. I think any student who has paid tuition fees this year should be allowed a 50% rebate on tuition fees for any future year, or for a master's degree if they're studying, or a doctorate if they're studying a higher level of education now. I think these are things that the university can offer, which we can demand, and that they cannot wriggle out of. I think they will try and wriggle out of sweeping refunds, but at the bare minimum, if the government fails, as they have continuously done over the last 10 years, we should at the very least make sure that the university can't use that as a cop-out and avoid doing anything.
Nice. So same question again, Lucas.
Dom may find this a little surprising, but I'm going to have to agree with his kind of view. We've been the #1 SU every year since 2009. That has brought a lot of people to Sheffield. It brought me here, and it's only right that we try and use whatever leverage we can. I don't doubt, it's a humongous mountain to climb, especially given the current government, but it's a it's just a case of using the leverage, using similar tactics to what Dom said about kind of disrupting, like maybe putting students off and saying, no, don't come to Sheffield, go somewhere else. And then while it's not a universal change across the sector, but it may help with our own university.
Nice, nice. Same question to Grace.
Yeah, a lot of interesting points said there. I'm going to agree with Ash's slightly pessimistic view, just because I've spent so many years working with the universities from the perspective of chair of the BME committee, and also as a member of the SU staff as an events project manager last year. I've seen how things move within the SU and the university, and it is very slow and painful. And sometimes you have to look at it with that realistic view of knowing what people's attitudes are in academia. And it's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So I think in this particular situation with COVID and with the pandemic, I know where the SU gets their money from. It's been hit hard, that's no secret. But what I don't think we should expect is that the university and the SU are going to come and sweep in and solve all our issues. So what we need to do is look towards support. What can we do to actually ease that burden for the students that this has hit the hardest, the students with jobs, the students who are first generation immigrants, second generation immigrants. These are the students that the university is not representing because we don't see their voices at a leadership level within the staff and within the student body. So my stance on that is, what can we do to lessen the burden for our students if we can't give them the best possible situation or outcome?
Nice. So finally, Rosie, same question.
Yeah, I completely agree with a lot of what everyone said, to be honest. I think we've covered all the bases in 1 5-minute meeting. But yeah, I think similarly what Grace was saying is that we're going to be put under a lot of pressure this year financially. And the SU and the university, just thinking of our students' union, I think is a little bit sort of short-sighted. I think we should be looking at lobbying with other students' unions. I think that's where we should start from. It's where we should continue from. But more so that, I think we should be working with organisations outside of the students' union, society and stuff like that. I think like ACORN, as Alison mentioned earlier, is an amazing organisation that works with, that helps students, helps people in the community have better housing and things like that. And it's really those sort of, it's really those things that have affected people the most that we need to be targeting. So yeah, I think we definitely need to be having the support there for the students this year, as well as much as we are lobbying for the change that is going to be happening.
Nice, nice. So I'm now going to do some individual questions. So I'll start with Evie. Many of your policies fall under the remit of other officers, for example, the Liberation Officer and the Welfare and Sustainability Officer. So why do you think it would be your role to implement these policies? And would your manifesto perhaps be better suited to another role?
I think it's really important that the president kind of has a radical view on things, and I think that these are huge issues at the moment. Even though they come under the category of some other roles, it's really important that the president has a sight on these as well, because they're just of paramount importance at the moment. I don't see an issue with it overlapping slightly. I think if anything, it brings more solidarity and more likely that these causes will actually be changed and there will actually be positive change towards them.
Nice, nice. So Dominic, you ran for SU president last year. What makes you believe that you will be successful this year, and how have you improved your manifesto to appeal to students more?
I thought I might be able to get through the debate without someone reminding me of that. I think it's a case of that old adage, you know, if at first you don't succeed, try again. You know, a lot of the sort of basics of my manifesto hasn't changed an awful lot, because I think the big issues for students, which are mental health, housing, how we operate with the university, that hasn't changed. these are still the big issues, and they've become more acute and more blatant to everyone over the last year because of everything that we've experienced. So the basics of the manifesto haven't really changed. I'm just hoping that people pick it up a bit better this year, I think. And yeah, but you know, there's obviously a lot of things have changed, and there's a lot of different bits that we can make progress on, and there's new stuff in the manifesto. Some of my approach to mental health, for example, was changed on last year, adopting the demands of the rent strike. There was no rent strike last year, so obviously that wasn't in the manifesto. But you know, so things have changed, but I'm the same old person at the end of the day.
Nice. So Alison, your petition idea will be likely a very popular idea, but how will you ensure that your system is implemented, and how will you manage the workload that responding to petitions will add to an already busy management team?
Yeah, good point. I think the idea was born out of the fact that you have like pages like Chef Fashions and things where a lot of people were voicing their views, and it made me think, why are you going to something that is not linked to anything else, and you're not going to get any support for it? And it made me think, actually, we need to start reducing the barriers for students to be able to feedback properly to management and to the SU. So that was the reason why I chose, I thought about the petition system. In terms of workload, I think it will be about having enough signatories. It has to reach enough thresholds to get to a certain position anyway. And I think it can be incorporated into sort of potentially SU council work and things like that. But I think that's not the biggest reason here. The biggest sort of philosophy of it is actually we need to make it easier for students to get their voices heard.
Nice. So Grace, your manifesto outlines why you'd be suited to the role, but could you give a bit more detail on actual policies you hope to bring if you're elected?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, we need to improve the mental health service. It is no secret that the mental health service is not actually servicing anyone. It's actually doing the opposite point, and it's actually causing a worse effect on students' mental health that are actually going there to get help. And to me, that's just mind-blowing. So first and foremost, I think we can all agree that the effect of this year on people's mental health collectively is terrible. And I think in order for us to provide a holistic university experience for new students coming, we need to show that we're actually doing what we can to look after their minds and their emotions, as well as just their brains and their intelligence. So I think that's super important. Another thing that I think is super important that should be centered within everything that the SU does is anti-racist work. I keep saying it, and how many people are literally going to have to die in the world for people to take notice? And it's getting to a point now where I can speak for myself and the ME committee and the students of colour in our organisation that we are sick of not seeing the university do anything. The SU and the university are staying silent on this, and we've got to think, why is that? And for me personally, it's because I do not see people of colour reflected in this organisation. I believe that the university has to have a central anti-racist policy. This is not just being against racism, this is actually showing actions. What are you doing about the attainment gap? There have been statistics and facts that have been collected on the attainment gap from the university for a number of years now. This isn't an issue of not having an inquiry into this. It's not an issue of not having enough research. The research is there. This all comes back to too much talk in academia and not enough action.
Nice. So speaking of mental health, Rosie, could you give more detail into your idea of introducing a mental health first aider into every society? What kind of training would such people receive? What responsibilities would they have for their society?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm part of the Ed Bramley Law Society this year. We're one of the first societies to train one of our committee members to be fully mental health first aid trained. So essentially maybe we're the tester society for it, and it's gone really well. And that's, bearing in mind that's online. So we had like a email base where people could email for well-being, and we had someone messaging every month into group chats to make sure everyone's okay, constant reassurance, and just messages that would ensure that people knew where to go. So our amazing social secretary is Alice, is the first mental health first aid trained, and she was able to really help students this year, especially because we were all online. But I think more so that if we can do this, bringing it back into person, it's going to have such a bigger effect. We're going to be able to meet, we're going to be going in groups again, meeting new people. You'll also be able to see straight away maybe things that are influencing others. So it is quite expensive to get this mental health first aid trained. I'm not going to deny that, but it would be funded obviously by the Students' Union, one representative from each, and also you can get group meetings. So instead of it being one person that you're training for 2 days in mental health first aid, just as you would for physical, you can do it to a large group of people. So this is bearing in mind that we're all going to be back at university in September, fingers crossed. So this would be, yeah, exactly. But even if it's not, even if we're not, we still have the online opportunity to do it. But yeah, that's basically what, and it's up to the societies, of course, as well, who they represent, who they want to represent as a mental health first aider, and how they implement it in their society. I don't think it should be dictated how they do it. Each society knows their own members the best. So yeah, it would be more just providing the funding and the opportunity for societies to do that. Mike, I think the mic's off. Oh, right,
Yeah, sorry about that. I think my housemates were slamming the door, so I muted myself for a second. I'll start that again. So many students, Lucas, many students feel they were missold the blended learning approach, and you say you want to prevent this from happening again. How do you intend to do so?
So this year, the university has been appalling. We haven't known whether we're coming or going. Should I move to Sheffield? Should I go back home? We've been like, it's been a wild goose chase trying to figure out what's going on. Only early this week, we got an email saying, don't return home over the Easter break. Like when you, at the beginning of the year, over the summer, we were told you'd have some in-person teaching, you'd have a bit of online content, but that soon just turned around and became online only. I've had no in-person lectures, contact hours this year, and I know plenty of others who haven't. And people do feel disappointed that they've been missold. And it's important that to consider like looking at potential fee refunds, because people haven't been getting the, I mean, we all hate the kind of marketization of higher education, but we can't doubt it is what it is. People have been missold what kind of teaching they're going to get and the experiences that they're going to get. So I want to work with the university, if elected, over the summer to put in place a plan, perhaps a little cautious than other people, but so that students don't have to worry about, am I going to be able to move in? Am I going to start learning in Sheffield? It's about providing that certainty for students. So it's important, well, so there's that aspect. And second part of that is, if things do go sour over the summer, if there's a fourth wave, well, a third wave, fourth wave, and things aren't looking good, then I want to negotiate flexible contracts so students aren't having to potentially start paying for empty rooms again and then having to deal with another COVID support fund. I think it's better for students to be able to say, I don't feel comfortable moving in September. I want to leave it a bit more. And also on the other end, if things start going worse again, they should have the right to end their contract early without penalty.
Nice. Thank you very much. Now, Ash, we obviously have to ask you about the president role. So why do you not think that the president is a necessary role as a leader and spearhead for the SU officer team? And also, the president's salary is around 20k. How much of a difference would that make in a long term versus having a representative?
Sure. So I've been a student for about a decade. I haven't been at the University of Sheffield that entire time, but I did arrive here initially in 2011. I've been following SU elections. I've known in varying degrees, I've shaken hands, I've rubbed shoulders with, or run against every presidential candidate, every president we've had in the last decade, pretty much without fail. I've seen every presidential campaign over the last 10 years, and invariably they are basically dipping into another role. You know, each president, you might be an education president where most of your manifesto is education policies. You might be a welfare president where most of your manifesto is welfare things. We've had activities presidents. The reality is that historically, when we've elected a president, what we've really done is elected a second person into a role that already exists for the most part. Now, that is not to say that there aren't some scenarios where our presidents have done something presidential, which specifically relates to lobbying. Jake Verity did a great job in lobbying for the £1 bus fare, but there is nothing that any of our presidents over the last 10 years have done that couldn't have been done by an empowered student leadership team. An empowered student leadership team which has just undergone a radical change, and I think is a perfect time for us to really visit whether we want to have this power structure, which gives the university carte blanche to put one person in a room and say they've represented the Students' Union, to say that person is the embodiment of the Students' Union, we've said something in front of them, so we're washing our hands of whatever it is. I think if we create a structure where the university and where any other external body that interacts with us as a union has to face our leadership team rather than one person, it makes it much harder for them to slip something past. No one person is an expert in anything. No president knows everything about education as well as their education officer. No one president knows everything about activities as well as our activities officer. Likewise, welfare, etc., etc.
Nice. I'm gonna have to cut you off just because of time, but because I want to ask other people of their opinion on this. What do other people? Has anyone got any of their thoughts on this? Does anyone want to go first? Lucas?
I think the point of a president is to provide direction for an organization, and the president is going to kind of coalesce all the voices from different parts of the universe, from the SU, into one single thing and deliver the will of the people. And you're going to have conflicting personalities, conflicting views, but the president at the end of the day kind of gets all those opinions and puts it out into one single format.
Nice. Yeah, Grace?
Cool. I agree with Ash. I think the role of president is a really interesting one because you're right, you know, you can't choose one person to suddenly just stand above everyone else in a leadership team, what you actually bring to the table. Although I do believe that the president should have some experience and be able to represent at least a handful of the different voices that are in our Students' Union. If you're going to be at the top, if you can represent the minority, you're covering everyone.
Does anyone else have anything to say? Alison?
I think just going back to how it's a really critical time, and Ash spoke about lobbying as a potential use of a president, and I think that actually lobbying for government bailout at this time and in solidarity with other SUs takes a lot of the work off of other officers who can then prioritise on more sort of individual student work, because students shouldn't be having to do this work of like lobbying for government bailout. Yeah. Great answer. Yeah, I was talking about that. So in terms of to actually enable other officers to do their job and focus on their priorities, their students. The president in this year particularly can focus on a government bailout or focus on sort of that management relationship side that actually the other officers shouldn't have to deal with. So I think that is a reason why president is a good role, but then equally I do also agree with a lot of the points Ash made, and I do advocate for flat hierarchies and a lot of other things. But yeah, so I can see the pros and cons of it, but I think it's particularly useful this year.
Dominic?
Oh yeah, so I think what Ash was saying, you said one of the things that perhaps they're okay at is the lobbying side of things, and you referenced Jake Verity and the £1 bus fare. I think that's sort of spot on. I think the emphasis for the president should be also, as Lucas said, about the vision and the long-term sort of perhaps relationship with the university, and the sort of culture within how the student union approaches issues. Is it a corporate union? Is it a political union? What is it? And I think that's what the president is crucial for at this point. I think once we've transitioned, we've had these radical changes that we needed. We've transitioned to a political union, a union, that genuinely is able to empower its students, with more empowered officers because of the additional resources that we'll have. Then I think that would be a good time to very heavily question whether or not we still need a president, and whether it is time for a flat power structure. But I think at this point there's still some work at the top that needs doing, and I think you recognise that to an extent, Ash, and you've perhaps seen that in myself based on your rather charming endorsement last year. So there's still work that needs to be done, and we'll get it done, I think.
Has anyone else got any comments on Ash's stance? No. So I'm going to do one last question to you all. What do you believe makes you the most suited? So I'm going to say that question again because I completely messed it up. Why do you believe that you are the person I can't get my words out today. What do you believe makes you the most suited to be the face of the SU? Does anyone want to start? Ash?
I've been a trailblazer of student democracy for the last 10 years. I've represented Sheffield University and Lancaster University at NUS level, at NUS LGBT conference, at NUS trans conference. I was at the first ever one of those. I've stood for president before, and in doing so, I have carved a path for presidents to understand this role going forwards. The first time I stood for president, I asked if any of the other presidents knew what the constitutional role of the president was. They didn't. Now they do. I think the reason why we have more informed candidates now is because we've had people challenging the status quo that existed for many years. And I think I was one of those challengers. I was the first person to be openly trans and to stand for an SU role. And I was dead named in a leaflet that was sent out. I am the reason why the SU now asks candidates what the name they would like printed on leaflets is, rather than simply printing one on their student record. I've got a long track record going back years of pushing for change in the student union, for pushing for better representative, more representative student union, for pushing for trans people to be better represented in the student union. That's what I've always done. It's what I'll continue to do. And if I'm elected, it's what I'll spend the next year doing. If I'm not elected, it's still what I'll spend the next year doing, except I'll be holding one of the people in this room to account, making sure they're doing it too.
Nice, nice. I'll just pick on people to go next. So Dominic, may you go next.
Yeah, just to start with, I think Ash is absolutely correct when they talk about the tremendous impact they've had on the SU. And I remember, several years ago now, when I was planning on running, I looked through the videos and I thought, oh God, I'm glad Ash isn't running this year. So yeah, no, definitely a lot of brilliant work has been done by Ash, and I recognise that. So what I think what I bring to the SU is that, so I have quite a lot of experience with regards to council. I was the vice chair of council serve on quite a few different committees, such as Societies Committee with Lucas, the Mental Health Matters Society. So I've had quite a broad range. But I think most importantly, in the same way that Ash spoke about sort of being a trailblazer and considering different, something different to the status quo, I think again that's what I'm offering. You know, I'm not offering a continuation of the status quo that quite frankly isn't working. I'm fed up of it. I think everyone in this room is fed up of something, otherwise they wouldn't be running. But you know, I think it's part of seeing the bigger picture that a lot of the things that we are rightly annoyed at need broader sort of systemic change in our approach to be able to actually address these problems in a productive way. So I think, yeah, it's about challenging the status quo and not being afraid to tell the university exactly what you think of them, and again, sort of being willing to take a bit more direct action as opposed to just asking nicely. I think that's the change I'm trying to bring.
Nice. Grace, can you go next?
Sure. So I think that SU president needs to represent the student body. We've covered that. And as someone with several intersecting identities, I do feel like I represent the variety of experiences that we have in this institution. As you pointed out, my manifesto does read a little bit like a CV. And that's because I want to be picked as the best for the job based on my qualifications and my achievements, not my popularity or buzz topics or buzz policies that I can throw in there that I know people will want to vote for. You want to create spaces for marginalised students at the university. Those are the people that our university are neglecting. So why aren't you stepping aside and allowing someone who represents those voices a space at the top?
Nice. Lucas, can you go next?
So I believe I'm most qualified because I have a track record being on the committees of various societies. I've been chair of the Singers Society, and this year I've had the privilege of being the chair of the Societies Committee. And this year has been tremendously tough, as Dom could probably back up. But I'm a leader who kind of brings everyone around the table. I'd say I'm a diplomat. It's important that you're not going to get on with everybody. And it's important to deal with situations appropriately, but also being able to speak up when necessary. And I want to bring a vision that represents the whole SU. I've got plenty of big ideas, but I think they're all achievable. And I think the most important one that I'm lobbying for would be to lobby Sheffield City Council to improve the street lighting in student areas and parks. And I think after the recent events of what's happened in London, I think it's more important than ever to start changing what Sheffield's like to students and changing it for the better.
Nice, nice. Evie?
So my experience throughout uni has been working with the SU as part of some of the working committees, and that's been experiencing campaigning the whole time. So that's been at the uni, but it's also been with other SUs, and I've been in a lot of the big university rooms now. I know how the bureaucratic processes work and how this change works and how long it takes to make change at the uni. I was one of the first academic reps to get the university talking and to actually commit to embedding ESD across all departments. So I'm experienced in bringing change, and I've built my whole campaign around my network and hearing what people want. And I plan to bring this if I'm elected as SU president, and I'll just amplify voices. But I do appreciate what Grace has said completely. I nod my head to you.
Nice, nice. Rosie?
So I think this role of president is really it's really what you make of it. What Ash was saying about it not being necessary, I do somewhat agree. Well, I do agree with the flat structure, but I'm not sure if I agree with it without the president role, because I think it really can reflect what the students want. There's been more activities. Sorry, I'm swaying the question here. There's just more activities that some presidents want, and there's certain welfare things that other presidents want. But if they're being voted in as president, then it's clearly something that the Students' Union want. And if they're going to be doing things more than what the students want that year, then I think it's like completely fair enough. But I think from my experience this year, I've been working with the Edward Bramley Law Society. I'm a Global Opportunities Ambassador. It's meant that I've not just worked with Students' Union, it's meant I've worked with charities, non-profit organisations, other organisations in Sheffield and across the UK. I've really like boosted links between charities and organisations as well that's now been set up for future years. It's a sort of communication that I want to bring to this role. As well as that, I was an international student in the Netherlands, so I know what it feels like to go to a new country and, you know, not know the culture, not know the places where you are, not be used to it. So I feel like I'll really be able to help with international students' worries, especially that within my policies as well.
Nice. And finally, Alison.
Yeah, I think your question sat on easy with me when you said you'd be the face of the SU and why you'd be best at that, because I think similar to what Ash and what Grace is saying, which I totally agree with, it needs much more diversity, much more representation, but to do that as a collaborative team and to represent students like collaboratively through that. I also think in terms of what makes a good officer and a good president, like what everyone said about needing to have change. I think a lot of the time we're scared that we can't change or systems are the same. And I've helped set up Our Bodies, Our Streets, which is what Lucas is talking about lighting up the parks and safer parks after dark. We created that in the summer when street harassment was at a huge high in lockdown, and we've developed like projects since then, working with communities, working with different stakeholders, knitting these like voices together, and we've never done that before. And I think a lot of things that presidents have to do is what they've never done before. Like we have different experiences that we can go upon, but actually just the values and the willingness to try something. I set up Sheffield Student Action when I realised there were so many voices that weren't being listened to, which I hope to then write an open letter to the VC. And I just think that, just general value, general willingness to change, because anything could be thrown at you as a president and as a team of officers. And I think you just need that attitude to deal with it and to stand for students.
Oh, Alison, could you just say that last sentence again? Sorry, for me, I think the internet was cutting out a little bit. Could you just say that last sentence again? I'll give you a few seconds to remember what you said, though. Sorry about that.
I'm not good at remembering what I said, but I think I just said you just need to have the attitude and willingness to create change when people say you can't, and to do that collaboratively with a group of officers to stand up for students. Was that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. These have been your presidential candidates. Back to the studio.
Hello, I'm Benji Holland and welcome. Yes, it's the big one, the SU President Debate Punditry. I'm once again joined by Liam and Tansy. Hi guys, how are you?
All right, thank you. How are you? Not too bad.
Good, I'm really good. So after that great debate we've just had, how do you think coronavirus is a SU president? I'll start with Liam.
I think coronavirus has been a massive impact to us all, and I think it's vital that the SU president addresses these issues. I think it was raised a lot throughout the debate in which, you know, the SU needs to be a lot more radical in terms of standing up for the student voice. They've said it's become a lot more corporate. A lot of the candidates were voicing their concerns about the SU kind of stepping back and being a bit passive on these issues, particularly with rent, tuition, all of the issues in which students are faced with isolation as well. And we've got a set of radical candidates here that are eager to enforce a lot of change, and hopefully they do follow through with that, whoever does win the campaign. But I do think that addressing coronavirus, not only as what happens after coronavirus, but it could still be an issue come September. We simply don't know. So how would they address that if, for example, restrictions are still in place?
And Tansy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Liam. I think there's definitely a huge change and shift in terms of student needs this year after the pandemic happened. You know, compared with last year, you know, we wouldn't imagine that, tuition fees and compensations and accommodation fees would be such a huge concerns this year. So yeah, throughout the debate, I have noticed quite a lot of candidates that mentioned, the universities lack of willingness to offset or compensate the loss of students this year. So I'm looking forward to discuss with you more about the solutions and how do they aim to compensate or kind of reduce the amount of loss that the students have experienced in the past few years.
Completely. So Alison, Dominic, especially quite radical plans. Alison spoke about setting up like a student venters union, and Dominic actually shutting the SU on open days to sort of force the uni's hand. How effective do you feel like approaches like this are ensuring that sort of change occurs? I'll start with Tansy this time.
I think there's pros and cons in terms of having these really radical strategies in terms of facing the university and pushing it to make the changes. So the point is because as quite a lot of candidates have mentioned that last year the kind of mild approaches in terms of lobbying the university didn't really work, and that is quite disappointing to see. So maybe the radical approaches would push the university to kind of make any changes. But the concern with this kind of strategy is that the university's reputation and SU's reputations are really, really important in terms of attracting more fresher students and international students as well. So they have to consider the impact on students who are not originally coming from this region, how they perceive these information. If this information not properly advertised or let's say communicated with these students, then that's going to be a problem.
Brilliant. And Liam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the candidates did mention the fact that the SU has become a more corporate body rather than a politicized one. And as a students' union, you want it to stand up for students and students' needs. And there is a feeling that the SU has been very passive on the coronavirus issue. I mean, students have been one of the most neglected age groups and groups in this pandemic, and often felt forgotten. I mean, the call for COVID compensation is there throughout. The petition system, I think, would be a very popular policy of Alison. She mentions that the page Chef Eshens, which is a popular Facebook group, has been used a lot to voice student issues. And when you think about, is there a place for students to voice like their issues they're having with the university in general, where do they go? Often we're told, speak to the Vice Chancellor, but realistically, how possible is that going to end with anything? If anything, it's going to be ignored. And with Dominic, calls for sit-ins and whether or not that will be effective. Well, we're not doing anything at the minute, or not seeing anything active. So how can we comment on whether or not it would be effective, because it hasn't happened yet? I do believe it could be a strong strategy in order to provoke the university into some sort of change, particularly when you've got prospective students coming to the university on an open day, seeing the SU closed, which is a vital part of an open day, would be quite a strong statement made by the SU.
I completely agree, and it definitely would be. And Liam, you spoke about mental health a little bit there, and Rose Grace both touched upon that when they spoke in the debate. Especially Rosie, she brought up this policy that she's got about this mental health first aider scheme that she's looking to implement. Why are policies like this so important, even now, especially now in obviously the time of coronavirus? I'll start with Liam.
Yeah. Look, mental health this year has been, Mind Charity themselves have declared a mental health emergency. We're living in a time where so many people are isolated, not out of choice, but because it's the situation in which we're in. And students particularly, they're telling us we can't go home for Easter. There's people who could be in households on their own, I know I had an experience back in January when I came back to university of being on my own, and it is really tough on your mental health, not being able to have a conversation with someone. You know, we're social animals. We need to talk to people. And unfortunately, even in first year, with all the first year students going to halls is such a eye-opening experience, and even in normal times it's very overwhelming and daunting. So I can't help but feel sorry for those who have gone to university for the first time and been stuck in one household, one flat, because you don't know what those social dynamics are going to be. There's people who are going to be feeling homesick, and also the international student community who have not been able to go home, not been able to go to their countries, had to experience quarantine when coming back. You know, there's so many different issues that need to be tackled with mental health, and there is an urgency for it to be solved very swiftly.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Tansy, why are these policies so important for an SU president now?
I think very simply, university life is not only about academia, it's also about being a person, exploring who you're going to be in the future. And that's so much about, you know, well-being and mental health. I think in terms of, you know, you mentioned Rose's policies in terms of integrating mental health services and policies into student life. I think she recognized the fact that there's so much more other than university academia and university commitment that we are dealing with in daily life. And yeah, as Liam mentioned that, you know, as a student or international or home student, they've experienced a massive, you know, this kind of gap between not being able to communicate with anyone. I've been staying in the UK for 2 years now and not being able to see my family since the March of 2019. So that is a, you know, a huge concern, I think, for all of us. That is something that we've all of us experiencing. So if the SU president is not recognizing the importance of mental health this year, then, you know, that's going to be a problem. So it's glad to, I'm glad to see that the university students and president candidates are recognizing the issue.
It is very refreshing, it is. So which mental health policy from all the candidates stood out the most for you? I'll start with Liam this time.
I thought all of them were very similar in the sense that, you know, it's getting people talking. Obviously, we've mentioned Rosie's one that was brought up quite a bit. The fact that we need to treat mental health as, for example, you know, there's this talk of comparing mental health to physical health. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And I thought, like, being able to train representatives as a mental health first aider would be one of the first starts. You know, societies are a point of contact that many people use, particularly if they're, you know, it's how you get involved with the union as a starting point, whether or not you want to get involved with sports or any of your passions or hobbies. I think that's one of the main mental health policies that would stand out to me, particularly because, well, I mean, Forge in itself is a society. So if people on committees of these societies are trained in mental health, it's something that people who participate in such societies can approach.
Perfect. Tansy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, just adding a point. I think Lucas' policy in terms of enhancing the ability to organize event at the SU in terms of, you know, supporting the societies and including facilities, improving the facilities for all the sports clubs and at our gyms. And that is, you know, something that we've mentioned a lot in the past few years. And I really want to see that kind of action being implemented this year, because, you know, simply because we don't, you know, we have zero physical and face-to-face communication when we take part in the societies, and that's a huge challenge for the societies to in terms of recruiting freshers next year. So yeah, that is really important, I think. So Lucas' policy that stand out to me in terms of, you know, supporting societies.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So aside from that, now Ash was really pushing this flat sort of, he termed it, more democratic structure to the SU. What are your sort of opinions on this? I'm going to start with Tansy this time.
Yeah, that is a very interesting part of the whole debate, and I think quite a lot of candidates are arguing, saying that Ash is trying to diminish the function of the role completely, but I don't think so. I totally see where he's coming from, and a lot of other candidates agree with him, to some extent, that looking back, we have elected mental health presidents, activity actants, and so far, and they are just taking the role that can be done maybe by another person. So I see where he's coming from, but in reality, if we're getting rid of the president role, how do the SU officer team deal with factionalism? How do the team distribute resources equally and fairly? These are the things that we have to consider in reality, theoretically speaking. And I think delegation is the most important task of being a president. This includes identifying what a president can do that others can't do, which is really, really important for this role. So, looking back to Ash's statement, I think what's quite interesting that is Alison's actually mentioned that, she think the rule of president next year should be lobbying the university and focusing more on government bailout. I think I have to agree with her in this case. So in summary, whether we need a president or not, I think shouldn't be down to individuals' will or opinions. It's down to the student needs, because the needs are ever changing. As I've mentioned this year, we wouldn't imagine that education and accommodation, housing fee would be the issues. So our SU officer team need to follow student needs.
And Liam, do you think a president is necessary? Do you think this extra 20 grand that would be spared could be pumped into better things in the SU?
To be honest, I think that 20 grand is a little bit of a drop in the ocean in comparison to funding for largely university things. I think changing the power structure now is probably the wrong move. I would say that students need a figurehead to turn to, and whilst I agree, yes, there could be more democratic power structures in place, I feel like it can be a lot slower process in making these decisions. We need someone who will literally make the decisions on behalf of the officer teams, because let's not forget, there are an SU officer team already in place that can help with these decisions. And look, the SU president, yes, whilst it can form into one role or the other, whether it be mental health, activities-based, etc., I do think that it will just challenge the issues that are relevant for that year. This year in particular, coronavirus and equality and mental health are going to be the huge issues this year, and the ones that are going to be tackled. And I think having that one figurehead there that people can turn to, can lobby the university executive, is very important to have, and essentially a face for the SU.
Brilliant. And Evie has previous experience, she said, working in conjunction with other SUs around the country. How do you think this will aid her in sort of pushing through policy in the future and her presidential outlook? Tansy?
Yeah, well, the first thing came into my mind is that she's a really strong team player, and she has that experience in collaborating with other departments, whether in the university or outside the university. So that is quite, very significant quality in the president role that we're looking for, is the ability to be a strong team player and also be able to delegate tasks and recognizing different person's personality and quality, and therefore recognizing what's need to be done and prioritize resources. So yeah, that sounds to me like she got that box ticked in terms of leadership and communication collaboration.
And Liam, what do you think about Dominic and his ideas of sort of forcing the uni's hand on certain issues? The SU, it was rated the #1 since 2009. And if the uni can't use that to their advantage, how do you think that will aid students at Sheffield Uni?
Look, there's been several things that students have lobbied for over the past year. For example, no detriment policies, and it's been able to go through. Not this time, though, in this semester, unfortunately. There will be no detriment policy, essentially, this semester. I think that forcing the union... Look, the Students' Union is there, essentially. It's in the name. What a union does is it stands up for the people that they represent. And ultimately, I do agree with the fact that the Students' Union has become a corporate figure. We do remember it as Bar One, Foundry, you know, a place where you go and you eat, essentially. It has become more of a business rather than something that you can go to stand up for what you believe in and stand up for student beliefs. And I think that having that provocative approach that Dominic wants to have could be very effective in forcing the union's hand, because the union can always turn and go, well, the students haven't got a problem with the union because they're number one. So we're not going to change our view on it, and there is no pressure applied to us. The only way in which you make someone change their mind is by applying pressure. And the number one pressure group to the university should always be the Students' Union. And I absolutely agree with Dominic on that point. Just to touch on what Evie was saying in terms of her experience with other SUs, I think that that's going to be vital, because where a lot of the candidates have been talking about lobbying government, and you know, you can't lobby government as one sole students' union. You need to have a collaborative approach, and being able to work with other student unions across the country, we're much stronger together rather than being as a lone wolf in this. If every single student union in the country stood up against the university executive boards and the government, that would stand a greater chance of provoking change that university students want, as particularly this bailout that a lot of people are calling for.